Hey, I'm Sean Teis, and it's another episode of Let's Talk About Fatherlessness. I'm excited today to have my friend, Pastor Derrick Suttles.
Hey, Sean, good to see you, man.
Hey, man, will you just take a minute and tell us about your ministry, where you're at, and the church you serve at?
Absolutely. So we're in Central PA in Huntington, Pennsylvania. We've been here for a little over 3 years and serving as lead pastor here. I've got a beautiful wife who we've been married for 18 years. Love her, my best friend. And then we have 4 kids that the Lord has blessed us with. And so life gets busy. They're all, our oldest is a senior, our youngest is in 4th grade. And so we've got a lot of life happening in between those. But we're so excited for the opportunity to be a part of this podcast and to be able to share with your listeners just some encouragement of how God has used this subject in my own life and give me opportunity to minister to others who are going through the same things.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys so much. I mean, we actually were still traveling in our RV then. We stayed at your church, and I think that's when we first found the problems that we were dealing with our RV.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into that, but I'm not really going to talk about that. But anyways, we'll talk about fatherlessness. But anyways,
Yes.
but we went to your church, shared our ministry, and you're located real close to where I grew up. You're in the market. I spent all the time on this, but I grew up in Blair County, Pennsylvania. You're in Huntington County. It's real close. We used to play your church, your Christian school in soccer, and so it was cool to go to your church. But then I didn't expect when we went to your church that you and I would form a bond, and a lot of that bond came from, I think, from our backgrounds. Probably, obviously, our president, where we're in ministry, we're doing ministry, things like that. But we also had a bond because we both grew up fatherless, and I that's why I feel like you and I have a connection. One of the main reasons we have a connection because we grew up with like that. We understand each other. And sometimes it is hard to understand. So would you take just a few minutes and share your story of fatherlessness, of how you grew up, and anything you want to share about that?
Absolutely. So what I would say is there is nothing in life that has impacted me more than the gospel of Jesus Christ. Knowing that my sins are forgiven, that I have a relationship that has been redeemed, reconciled, restored with God through the finished work of Christ is awesome. And that touches my life every single day. Being a husband is that second greatest aspect that touches every aspect of my being. Being a dad is one of those things. But right up there is the idea of fatherlessness. And it's impacted me more than I realized initially. And it continues to impact me even today in just different ways. And it felt like it shows up often, which is why we do need to talk about it. And so my story is probably not too unsimilar to a lot of people, unfortunately, today. My mom met my biological father actually in a Bible college. His parents were on staff there. They got involved in a physical relationship and she got pregnant. A lot of pressure there because obviously you make the families look bad and all those things that go along with that, the shame, the guilt. But my mom was rock solid and she was not going to in any way, shape, or form give me up for abortion or adoption. Her dad that was a shotgun wedding error and he forced them to get married. That did not work out well. And my biological father was young. He had already had one other child out of wedlock. And so this was just another one of those things that kind of piled onto the story. And so I don't know all the reasonings, but bottom line is that within 3 to 6 months of the beginning of my life, he walked out and was not ever a part of my life. My mom raised me as a single mom for the first 8 years of my life. And I remember so often how she would work 2 and 3 jobs and do whatever she could to help provide. We lived with my grandparents during that period as well. And so that was a big part of my formation as well, having my grandmother as a part of my life and having my mom's 2 brothers kind of as the father figures in my life at that time as well. And so that was a tumultuous journey. My mom remarried when I was 8 years old. And he had come from a difficult background. He's a good guy. God has blessed our relationship. I love him. I call him my dad. But it was not easy for either one of us early on. His father was a drunkard. His father was not very loving, not very kind. And so trying to establish his leadership in our home oftentimes irritated him. And I'm sure that I was the source of that irritation. He wanted to be a dad, but didn't know how to be a good dad. And so we wrestled a lot. And there were things that happened that were just completely uncomfortable and difficult. But again, God's grace has covered all of that. So we don't need to like stay there. But that was kind of my introduction to this idea. I was an at-risk kid. I didn't know everything that meant, nor could I have verbalized all the things that I felt. But there were serious things happening in my heart that I just did not express. For instance, and I don't think this is uncommon, and I don't talk about this a lot, but as a kid, I was a bedwetter. And looking back now, as psychologists, psychiatrists have learned, that is a sign of emotional trauma that is a consequence of some of the difficulties you go through when you can't express or verbalize outwardly some things that happen inwardly to the body as a result of stress. And so a lot of those things accompany my life and a lot of challenges, but God has used so much of that to open doors, which I'm so thankful for.
That's such a great story, and the fact that you shared you're a bedwetter. Hey, I'm 38. I'm willing to admit it too. You know what I'm saying? And
Well,
it's
let me
interesting you
clarify,
say
not
that.
anymore.
No,
But
no,
I
no,
did.
no,
So,
no.
yeah,
I was too. I was too as a kid, but it's
right.
interesting you say that because I had a lot of trauma too. My dad left, and then there's a lot of fear. Growing up in the house we grew up in. Just the house that we lived in was kind of it felt unsafe a lot. And then
Right.
I moved in with my grandparents whenever I was 7, and then my mom moved into another house with another guy, and so there was that absence there, and so that's probably why I was. And so just as you
Yeah,
said that, I mean, I'm 38. I don't care. I'm willing to admit that I was a bedwetter when I was young. So
right.
but that is an interesting statement that you made there because there was a lot of trauma and struggles.
Right.
Um, now unpack. So how long was it between the fact that your parents got divorced and then your mom got remarried? How far? What was the? What
Yeah,
was,
so that would have been right at 8 years, because I was yeah, I guess it would have been 8.5, close to 9 years old when they got married. They got married in August, and I'm married through January. So a lot of time established really between that time for me and my mom to grow a close bond. And so it's just one of those things that has residual effects because you're so close to your mom. Your mom still desires companionship from a man, and then bringing that man into a dynamic of what you have made as functional through the years, and now
yeah,
trying to incorporate a brand new piece. It's just hard. It's just hard all the way around. Even if you have someone that's really godly and knows what they're doing and loving and kind, there's still a lot of friction because of the dynamics that you're putting in together in one place.
yeah, you're so right. Now tell you about your dad. Let's unpack that a little more. So, how, did you have a relationship with him? Tell us more about that. So he
Yeah.
got divorced. How old were you again? How old were you?
Okay, so I would have been somewhere between 3 and 6 months. So I literally never met him. I have never heard my biological father's voice, and the first time that I ever saw him face to face was when he was in his casket. Interesting story there is I got married in July of 2004, and that was always a big thing for my wife because she knew how much it impacted me. And she's like, well, why don't you just try to find out where he is and who he is and just get an idea of some of these things, just try to make contact. And I was very protective of my mom. I did not want to hurt her. I did not want to violate her trust or make her feel that somehow I was missing something that she wasn't giving all those years. And so I really scoffed against that idea. I thought, no, I just don't want to hurt her. But at the same time, the impact it had on me, because anytime we watched a movie or something mentioned about an absentee father, I was in tears. I mean, I just as a man, a grown man, broken because something inside me was broken and I couldn't express it. But when it was touched on, man, it didn't take long to get to the surface. And so after a long while, and I'm talking years, my wife convinced me to at least try to make contact with him. So I did do that. I reached out with him through an email, and I really just kind of poured my heart out to him. I wanted him to know up front that I am not trying in any way, shape, or form to get money or any sort of retribution for you not being there. I told him how God had provided for us. I told him about my wife, my kids. I wanted him to know, like, I really don't want anything from you. I just want to get the opportunity maybe to know you. And so he did end up responding back to that email, and but it was a little bit vague. You could tell he didn't really want to dive into the past at all, and that was okay because I wasn't trying to somehow produce a guilt trip for him or read into anything. I just wanted him to have a platform to kind of let me know his side of the story. And so there was probably about 6 to 7 interactions that we had back and forth through email, and then in that process as well, I actually had connected with my half sister, which was the other child that he had before me.
Mm.
And that's kind of a unique story too, because as a kid, I must have been somewhere around 10 or 11. I saw a picture on a bookshelf. It actually was in a book. I just happened to pick that book up, and it was a picture of my mom holding me as an infant, my biological dad standing up behind us, and then there was a little girl who was about 3 to 4 years old in that picture. And I always remembered that,
Huh.
but I couldn't ask questions. So I had looked for my half sister Courtney for a very long time. And so we had connected, and that was really a blessing to be able to do that. But after those few emails, I didn't hear back from him. And then she actually called me and said, "Hey, our dad passed away of a massive heart attack." And so we never got to have anything more than those few emails that we had. So it was tough. It was tough. Um, I'll go ahead and just continue on just a little bit
No,
with
you're
that
fine.
story
Share. Yeah,
because
share it.
it is interesting how it developed. And so I felt like I should go to the funeral. I wanted some closure. Um, and when I did, let me just say this: up until that point, I really had not struggled with what I would call bitterness. I clearly saw God's hand through everything. I trusted Him through the process, and God had put a lot of men in my life to help me. When I got to the funeral, it was really interesting because a lot of the family didn't know me. They knew about me, but when they saw me, there was no one of his kids, and he had four
Wow.
that looked more like him than I did. I mean, it was like when I walked in, his wife that he had currently been with thought she was seeing a ghost. I mean, it was uncanny how much we looked alike. And so it was really interesting through that process as well because he had communicated to her that there was something that he wanted to talk to her about, something that was weighing heavy on him that he never got the chance to do. And so we talked a little bit about that afterwards. But when the different people got up to speak about him and share a little bit about his life, one of the things that hit me was when I was sitting there, they began to communicate how much time he invested in kids that had absentee fathers. And I wasn't
Wow.
prepared to hear that because here I am thinking, man, I'm 36 years old and you have never one time reached out to me. You didn't even talk to me except for the fact that I reached out to you via email and I've never heard your voice. And now you're investing in all these other kids, but you didn't take 1 minute of your life to really invest and help me. I'm your kid. And so for the first time in all the years that I'd gone through that, I was hit with that truth. And I began to wrestle with bitterness and anger in my heart. And I had to run back to God and ask him to help me because it was crushing. Now I can look back and see here was a man who carried a very heavy burden of guilt, who was just trying in some way to redeem himself from the decisions that he had made by investing in those kids that were hurting just like he had hurt me. And so God gave me grace to be able to see it through those eyes. And so I don't hold that against him now. I actually think, you know what, I can see his heart and what he was trying to do. And I'm thankful that he did because you know what, those kids, they did need somebody in their life. And he did help some kids along the way.
Wow, that's such a powerful story. And I just reminded of I saw my aunt. So my aunt Barbara is the oldest of my dad's family, and she posted recently. My dad passed away Valentine's Day of 2020, and so it's easy to remember. But I even
Yeah.
forgot it. I forgot it because he didn't really impact my life. I forgot that he even
Yeah.
existed.
Mm.
I forgot because he
Right.
he left when I was a baby, like you. I was like
Yeah.
9 or 10
Yeah.
months old, And so, but she posted about him dying and how she missed him and how he was so fun and all these awesome memories. And so it was a little bit hard to hear that. But then I looked
Yeah.
down through the post, because you're just curious what are people saying about your dad.
Right.
And because you never really get over it, it's always this, who is this person kind of thing.
Right. Right.
Because I met him a few times. I had that opportunity. It wasn't great, but I just had
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
opportunity. Because he wasn't doing like your dad. He wasn't investing in people and things
Right.
like that. He
Right.
was just living for
Right.
himself. But the one girl commented, it was his niece, and she said, "Oh, she had like such a good relationship with him or something," and that kind of even hit me. Just
Mm.
this was like last week, it
Right.
hit me because I was thinking to myself, "You got to have a relationship with him.
Yeah.
You were his niece. I didn't get to have anything hardly
Right.
with him,
Right.
even just in that itself. Because I couldn't imagine being at the funeral,
Yeah.
hearing that, because I just
Yeah.
saw Facebook posts, but being at the
Yeah.
funeral." And hearing that and getting closure and then
Right.
just being like, man, he invested in other people. That would be really hard. And
Yeah.
wrestling with bitterness is something that I've struggled with too, where
Yeah.
I feel like I've mostly have gotten, over that. I mean, sometimes it does flare up at different times.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
I'm a human. But it took me years to forgive my dad. And so
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that about the bitterness side of it, because that is so true.
Right. Well, and you had mentioned about some remarks I'd sent to you a little bit earlier,
Yes.
and let me just dive into that just a little bit, because what happened was I went to watch Life Mark, which is a movie the Kendrick brothers had put out, and they do a lot of great work, and
Oh yeah.
and and every time I watch one of those movies, I'm hit again with some of these emotions. And I'm so thankful that a lot of those stories turn out, and it's really awesome to see how God puts things together. But in some ways, I felt like it's so empty for me, because that's not how my story turned out, and it's not always as clean as it
Yeah.
is in the movies. And so as I was thinking about that, you know, first and foremost, my mind runs to Psalm 27:10. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. And I've got to remember that while my earthly father was absolutely important, and the biological connection we had is one that was broken, that can't be restored, um, it doesn't mean that God wasn't there, and that God didn't step in, and that he was not the perfect father all along the way, even when I
Yeah.
didn't recognize it. And so that comforts me. um, but some of the other observations I had after watching that movie were this: is that the hurt of the fatherless runs very deep, but it comes to the surface quickly. And my thought there was, again, just here I am as a 41-year-old, I'm 42 now, that there are so many days when a man that I never met or heard his voice can still make me cry, feel anger, insecurity, fear, and many other emotions. And
Yeah.
it's amazing because you feel like you have some of these things tucked away, or maybe that you've conquered it, but then something happens, and it's just that quick reminder, and it's amazing how quickly it can come back to the surface. And again, the idea of bitterness is harboring hurts. I don't want to create a safe harbor for the hurts that are there. I want to run and take those to Jesus. But the point is that there are still some consequences from the choices that he made that I experience. And I have to face those, and I have to take them to Jesus and run to him, knowing that he cares for me way more than I could ever imagine. And he'll help me through those things.
Nice.
Another truth, and I think this was helpful for me to be able to distinguish, and this was the third truth: the fatherless don't have scars, they have scabs.
Mm.
And the reason that hit me so much is because scars are a product of the total healing. And so when you see a scar, it's a reminder that there was a hurt there, but it shows also that the healing has taken place from the inside out, and that it's done. Like that injury is taken care of, it's healed up. But scabs are a reminder that the healing is still taking place, but not finished.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing for me to remember, because I think a lot of times we want something to happen right away. God's been healing me for a long time, but scabs can be ripped off, and the process continues. And so for me, that was helpful, because I feel like there are times I put a pressure on myself that I should feel a certain way, or that I should respond in a certain way, or that I shouldn't feel certain things at this point in my life, because that chapter of my life is closed. I'm not fatherless anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But to understand the grace and patience that's needed, that this is a process of healing, and it won't be complete until I stand in the presence of Jesus, and the scars of sin are gone, and the scabs are gone, because I'm complete in Him. And that was
With
helpful for
that,
me.
just real quick, Derek, with that,
Yeah,
how do you get so? And I completely understand and agree with what you're saying, but how do you get past the where people say, or people would say, well, you're just acting like a victim then, the victim
right.
mindset,
Yes,
because you're not as a fatherless individual, you're not acting like a victim because you're just trying to heal, and it is
right.
a lifelong process. What would you say about
Absolutely.
that?
So what I would say of that is this, is that a victim is a person that uses excuse for their own bad behavior. And the
Hmm.
difference is that
Exactly.
this hurt happened to me, but it doesn't define me. And I
Yeah.
don't allow the hurt that I've experienced to be an excuse for bad behavior on my part now. And that is the major difference between those two. And so I'm not a victim. I'm a
Yeah.
recipient of God's grace in spite of
Amen.
the difficulties.
Yeah, and it's not like
Yeah,
we're choosing to always think about fatherlessness. It's just part
right.
of our DNA. It's who we are.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I had somebody say to me recently, "Well, it's not like you basically you work through it, you get over it, and you don't want to talk about that the rest of your life." And that's not how it works, right?
no,
I
not
mean,
at all.
even for single moms, it's the same thing. It's not how it works. It's part of your DNA. Even if
Absolutely.
they get remarried, it's still I was a single mom. I was
Right.
fatherless. It's part of who we are, and we're not being victims in it. It's just it's a healing process of renewed through God, trying to learn how to trust, how to learn how to look at God as a heavenly Father and not look at it as an earthly Father. I mean, there's so
Right.
many parts to it, and I
Yeah.
appreciate you saying it's like a scab because that is so
Right.
true.
Well, and let's even go back to the story of Jacob when God met with him and they wrestled, and it tells us that God touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh, and for the rest of his life he halted. Well, he was not portraying himself as a victim because he was still dealing with the residual pain of that encounter, but it was life changing. It was still part of his story, and God used that. And truly, every time that someone saw him halting or limping along, it was a reminder of his encounter with God. And so that's where we go back to this. When I look at this story, it does still hurt. Just in the same way that as Jacob was limping along, it still hurt. But would he trade that experience for anything else? Absolutely not. And in the same way, I would not trade the experiences that I went through, even as hard as they were, because of what I've learned and how I've seen God work through it. And so I still limp through life, but that limp
Mhm.
is a pleasant reminder of God's goodness and grace in my life through difficulty and hardship.
That's good. That's good. Now you're going down through the text you sent to me. Let's go ahead and you want to just keep going
Yeah,
on that?
absolutely. Let's do that. So,
Yeah.
number four was most stories of the fatherless don't end cleanly. And I mentioned that a little bit earlier. And I said, well, I'm so thankful for the stories that do. Most of the fatherless will live their lives with a hole in their heart, and most will never meet, and most will always wonder what if and wrestle with why. And I think that's again part of the story of what happens with us. And that's where we go back to, okay, in some sense we are a victim because we didn't choose for our fathers to leave. We didn't choose for the hardships that were attached to that. And so there are times where we wonder, what if they had been there? Or why did they leave? And we will wrestle with that because it's a natural consequence of sin. But again, the purpose of looking at that is not so much to use it as an excuse for bad behavior, but to say, okay, Lord, how can I take this and run to you with it? And how can you use this to let me help somebody else who's going through and wrestling with these same questions? It allows us the freedom and the opportunity to have empathy and not just sympathy. And there's a huge difference between those two. Number five is this, and I love this: God will take up the cause of the fatherless. And you see that truth throughout scripture. And this is the comment I had. Well, life has been very hard, and I've wrestled with many invisible to everyone else wounds and difficulties and hurts. God has been so very good. I have been blessed beyond measure with an awesome wife and four incredible children. And I love that because I feel like the truth is I have experienced the goodness of God in a way that maybe I would not have appreciated if things had been perfect. And I'm not
Yeah.
knocking people that have had a good home life. I want my kids to have a good home life. And I don't think that it cripples them in any way. But for me personally, I appreciate God's goodness so much more. All of this has been manifested in a desire to be a better husband than what I saw and didn't see by my dad not being there. I want to be a better dad than what I experienced without a dad and with some of the difficulties early on. And God has used that. And so I love that God takes up the cause of the fatherless. And I feel like there have been times where there have been extra blessings because of my circumstance, little I love yous from God in those specific circumstances. So I'm thankful for that. And then that kind of ties in with um, number 6. While being fatherless is a part of my story, it does not define me. And I go back to this idea: I've been adopted by God through the finished work of Jesus Christ. I am his son, and he is my father. And to have that privilege to be able to call him Abba Father, what an awesome thing, because he is the perfect heavenly father. Number 7, being fatherless can make you better. And I mentioned this earlier. I'm not perfect. I make a lot of mistakes as a parent, but I know what I longed for as a kid. And by God's grace, I can be that type of dad for my kids. My kids will never know the same hurts that I have wrestled with. And I'm so thankful for that.
Now, real quick on that one.
Yes.
So what was the difference? So how did you, so you're a pastor, you're living for God.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you're not perfect. Not everybody's perfect, obviously.
No, not even close.
But you're striving to live for God. You're striving to follow God. What was the difference in your situation compared to so many other people that become statistics out there? What was the thing that changed it for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can only point back to the redeeming grace of Jesus Christ. I was on a trajectory to be a stat of what the normal at-risk kid's path looks like. When I didn't get saved, I didn't place my faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ until I was 15 years old. I had heard the gospel. I knew the gospel. I was in a Christian school, but man, I was one way with my friends who didn't know Jesus and were outside the Christian school, and a completely different way with the kids inside the school. And after I got saved, I had a teacher tell me, "Oh, I'm so glad that you placed your faith in Jesus Christ, because if you hadn't, it's most likely that you would be in jail or dead right now." And they were right. They were right. I look back at what I was doing and who I was hanging out with. So that would be one of those things where I would say the other interesting thing is, and this is a part of the story, I know we're running out of time, but my biological father was actually a pastor. All of his other kids, with the exception of me, lived together, and I was by myself. So they saw him, they lived with him while he was a pastor. He had been married 4 or 5 times, I don't remember now, affairs along the way. And all of them I love, and I wish we could have more interaction, conversation. They would say that they believe God, but none of them really want to have anything to do with church or any sort of organized religion because of what they saw. So in some ways, I would just say God protected me from what I would have seen. And maybe I would have gone that same way had I seen that type of hypocrisy. So I think that may be the difference maker there.
Wow. That's great.
The last truth, just quickly, is that men need mentors. And it is said here, I can't tell you how many men God placed in my life to help me, and I am forever indebted to them. Thank you for taking that first step and investing in me. And the final thought I have is this: most of us who are fatherless have no clue how to communicate all that we feel. So please be proactive in reaching out to us. We really just need to know that someone cares and that our life really does matter. And that's a huge part. And Sean, you can attest to this. When people don't dismiss you because of your story, but they really take interest in you and nobody else did, man, you cling to that because you crave that. That's what you wanted from your dad. That's what you should have had from your dad. But because you didn't, there's a craving for that. And so when you have someone that loves you and invests in you, it is a difference maker.
Yeah, that's so true. And these are such great things. And I remember that when you texted me this was back in September. You texted me this, and it was just wow. And I showed it to my wife. She's like, "Wow, that's so powerful."
Yeah,
because you got all these things from that movie. And it's amazing how, because there's so many emotions tied to this with fatherlessness. There's so many things that we can't even, like you said in the end there, you can't communicate. And I appreciate how you just took it and said that these are the things that I've seen. And I think that's going to help our listeners, because sometimes when we're trying to help the fatherless, it's hard to understand them. It's hard to understand what they're dealing with, what they're going through. So I'm going to share this. If you're okay with it, we already read through it, but share the list that you sent to me in the notes of the show. But I just think it's so powerful. and you shared your story. It's such a great thing. Now, tell us going forward. You're at a point now. You're where are you at in the place of healing from your
Yeah,
father's journey?
absolutely. Man, I appreciate you asking that. God is so good. I will tell you that the key for me is that I immerse myself in God's word. I realize I'm a pastor, and so maybe, people would say, well, that's your job to do that. But I'm just telling you, I can't make it through without that, because the truth is hurt does poke its head through often. And like I said, it can show up around any corner. Every day there's potential to be reminded of the hurts that have happened. And so I have to keep my eyes firmly fixed on Jesus. And so the other thing too is just not so much looking at the past and remembering all that has happened, as much as looking at what God has done in the present and being reminded of what's in front of me. Man, my wife, my kids, they are one of my greatest joys. I love being with them. I love seeing what God's doing in their life. I look and think, man, God, why have you been so good to me? And I'm telling you, thankfulness is one of the best antidotes to hardship and hurt that you're ever going to find. And a lot of people find that difficult. Like, how do I say thank you to someone that's hurt me? How do I say thank you to someone that's abandoned me? And I'm not saying in a weird sort of way, like, oh, we should just look for people who are going to hurt us and invite them into our lives. But I can look back and see that God has used that to give me a whole new perspective in life, and looking at what I have versus what I should have had. Man, it just makes me overwhelmed with gratitude for God's goodness in my life.
Amen. That's so good. And as you're talking, I feel like later we need to do another episode of overcoming fatherlessness and being a husband and being a dad. If you're interested in doing that, I think that
Yeah,
would be.
absolutely.
I think because there's so much more that we can unpack, through
Yeah,
our stories of growing up, and now we're trying to be that. I'm not a perfect husband, I'm not a perfect dad, but I'm trying to be that dad and husband to
yeah,
my wife and kids. And so, would you be interested in doing that?
absolutely. Love
Let's
to
do
be
that.
honored.
A future episode, we'll definitely do that. We'll have that conversation. We need to wrap up now. But Derrick, would you just tell us how to find you, how to contact you through your church? Tell us about your church just
Yeah,
real quick. How to find you.
absolutely. So our church website is www.hereatcalvary, is spelled out .org. And you can email me through that. We're also on Facebook, Derrick-Katie Suttles. And I'm also on Twitter, Derrick_Suttles. And that's DERRICKSUTTLES. Love to connect with people. If you ever want to call me or email me, love to be able to be a help in any way that I can. Just trying to encourage you, because it is hard. And man, we do need people that can know where we've been, but also just point us back to the scriptures and help us get where we want to go.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Derrick. Thanks for being on with us today.
Thanks so much, Sean. God bless you, my friend.
To learn more about how you can get involved in Fatherless Family Ministry, visit lifefactors.org, where you can find some free resources. You can find our books that we have. You can find even the program that we have to help you start a single mom ministry within your ministry or within your church. We can all work together to lead fatherless families to the Heavenly Father.